The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've had a probably pretty welcome break from new polling data about the 2016 presidential election. We're going to take a look at a little bit of a different angle today. If I asked you about the grammar and spelling of current Republican candidates' supporters, who might you guess has a better grasp on proper grammar and spelling? The Democrats, the Independents, or the Republicans? And which candidates do you think they are supporting? Supporters of Donald Trump and Ben Carson, or do supporters of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders seem to have a better grasp on the English language? Well, there's a new analysis released yesterday by the proofreading application Grammarly. What they did is they analyzed the spelling and grammar of comments on each presidential candidate's Facebook page, and they were able to distinguish between positive and negative comments. And the analysis found, this may not be a surprise to some of you, that Republican supporters made nearly twice as many grammar and spelling mistakes as Democratic candidate supporters. Grammarly went to each candidate's Facebook page. They took comments that were at least 15 words long, so they eliminated the sort of 3 and 4 word, probably ad hominem type comments. And then they looked at whether the comments 15 words or longer expressed support, neutral, or negative feelings about the candidate. Then, looking at the positive comments, they analyzed whether they were grammatically correct, spelling errors, etc. And the analysis found that for every 100 words written, Democratic supporters made an average of 4.2 mistakes. The average Republican supporter made 8.7 mistakes per 100 words, more than twice as many. It also uncovered, the study did, that Democratic supporters have larger vocabularies, using 300 unique words per 1,000 words, compared to Republicans using only 245 unique words for every 1,000. According to Grammarly, the candidate with the most grammatically and spelling-wise correct comments from supporters is former Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Chafee. This is probably the best news that Lincoln Chafee has had during the entire election. He is just going absolutely nowhere. Donald Trump's backers made the most mistakes of all presidential candidate supporters. I don't know if that's surprising to you. Maybe that comes as a surprise, or maybe that's exactly what you would expect. In order of spelling and grammar correctness, the top candidates were, as I mentioned, Lincoln Chafee, followed by Democrat Jim Webb, followed by Democrat Bernie Sanders, followed by Democrat Martin O'Malley, followed by Democrat Hillary Clinton. The 5 Democrats at the top in terms of the grammar grasp of their supporters. Then came Republicans Carly Fiorina, then Ben Carson, then Lindsey Graham, then George Pataki, then Ted Cruz, and skipping all the way to the very, very bottom of the list, Donald Trump, whose supporters make the most spelling and grammar mistakes. Okay, does this matter? I mean, it doesn't tell us much about the validity, the strength of the policy ideas of the candidates, certainly, but I would argue that it does tell us a little bit about the type of people that each candidate's ideas resonate with. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that Donald Trump's campaign, which has been using xenophobic and anti-immigrant ideas, as well as tax ideas that are 110% divorced from any empirical economic realities, I don't think it's a surprise that the candidate who has those ideas is going to be followed by individuals who may not have the firmest grasp on basic grammar and spelling. I don't think that's a surprise. You decide how much value you think this has, and please also tell me whether you're surprised with these results. And I know I don't even need to say this because I know I'll hear about this anyway. If you just don't buy the results, tell me why the method employed by Grammarly to analyze the comments for grammar and spelling is not a good, accurate, and precise method. Let me know all of that stuff. We'll discuss it soon on an upcoming program. Conservative arguments in favor of more guns in more places have again been surfacing after the horrible shooting in Roseburg, Oregon at Umpqua Community College. These arguments are ones you're probably pretty familiar with at this point. More guns make people safer because they scare would-be perpetrators, and also they allow good guys with guns, as described by the NRA, to shoot bad guys with guns in the middle of a violent incident. And this perspective was best represented, and by best I don't mean in a way that I respect, but the sort of microcosm of this idea was presented by the NRA's Wayne LaPierre in a speech shortly after the Sandy Hook, Connecticut shooting, where he was talking about how great it would be to arm teachers, saying the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I quickly mentioned a couple of days ago in the wake of the Roseburg, Oregon shooting that there are statistics about active shooter scenarios and so-called good guys with guns. As a reminder, an FBI analysis of 160 active shooter situations from 2000 to 2013 showed that only one of those 160 was stopped by a civilian concealed carry licensee. He happened to be a U.S. Marine. 4 were stopped by armed guards, 2 by off-duty police officers, and 21 by civilians who were not armed. Let's dig more deeply into this. A recent analysis of FBI data found, as reported in the Washington Post, that for every lethal justified shooting, so in other words, what we might call colloquially a good guy with a gun scenario, guns were responsible for 34 murders, 78 suicides, and 2 accidental deaths. The vast majority of the 114 bad guy deaths for each good guy death could be prevented with some basic gun control measures. Acting like good guys with guns all throughout, intermingled in culture and society, acting like those are the main group of people that need to be protected by having relaxed gun laws is ridiculous because, number one, as we've talked about, even restrictive gun laws still allow, and I'm borrowing the term from the NRA, good guys with guns to obtain guns. That's number one. And number two, the numbers confirm that the good guy with a gun scenarios are so overwhelmingly, insurmountably dwarfed in quantity by people dying with accidental shootings, people using guns for suicides, people choosing, as we saw, by the way, at Umpqua Community College, there was an armed concealed carry civilian there. And fortunately, he realized if I start shooting, that's not going to improve the situation. And thinking back to the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting, it becomes obvious why these good guy with a gun scenarios are not what the NRA would like you to believe. Dark theater, shooting starts. You've identified that a bad guy with a gun is shooting. You take out your gun. Who do you shoot in the dark theater? Do you shoot in the direction that the gunshot came from? Do you realize the amount of deafening echo there would be when firing a gun in a movie theater? How do you even know what direction to fire in? You hear a bullet ricochet to your right. Do you fire in that direction? And what if there are 2 or 3 good guys with guns in the movie theater, and all of a sudden they start shooting? You think one of them is the bad guy with the gun, and you kill one of these supposed responsible concealed carry gun owners. So the good guy with a gun scenarios essentially don't exist. A number of experts in this have spoken out. Steve Benson, for example, who's a Vietnam veteran and former Navy SEAL, he has trained elite troops, and he said to The Nation magazine, in chaotic situations, the first thing you know is the S has hit the fan, and you don't know where the fan is. And unless it's constantly drilled into you, it's very hard to maintain discipline in those situations. Never mind the immediate hit of adrenaline, and the problem that in that state of mind, conscious thought shuts down because you've been taken over by your nervous system. This is exactly what we've been talking about. This is absolutely what we've been talking about. The numbers confirm that having a firearm makes a person twice as likely to be killed and 3 times as likely to commit suicide. And you might say, well, you could get killed with a baseball bat you have to defend yourself as easily as you could a gun. Obviously, you couldn't. You could say, if you're going to commit suicide, you're going to do it whether or not you have a gun. No, that actually has been shown not to be true, not to mention that the likelihood that you succeed is also going to be far lower if you don't have access to a gun. So on the whole, aside from any particular anecdotal instances you might be able to talk about, and I'm sure I'll get emails from people saying, but David, Joe in some place, who even cares where, was able to defend himself with a gun. That's fine. But what the data tells us is that for every single one of those incidents, there are 34 incidents that don't go well, plus 78 suicides and who knows what else. So make the case to me that in spite of all the data, it still makes sense to support this good guy with a gun ideology. Try to make that case in spite of what the data actually tells us. A right-wing religious nut accidentally came across what is actually an insightful prediction about the impact of gay marriage in the United States. This is Rick Wiles, who went back to the Jim Bakker show, completely outrageous, lunatic, religious right fear-mongering show. And he went on, and he was warning about the purported threat of gay marriage, this time telling Jim Bakker that people might actually die as a result of gay marriage. It's not exactly what you might think, though. It's a total gong show of lunacy, so brace yourself. Let's take a listen to what Jim Wiles had to say, Rick Wiles, rather, on the Jim Bakker show.
1973 happens, Roe versus Wade, and we just let it happen. Where were the Christians? Where were the believers? Yes, there was a voice here, there was a voice there, but why didn't we all come together as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ and Him, His Word, and stand up and say no?
And this is how we got to June 26, 2015.
Exactly.
And they changed marriage.
That's right.
Because they knew the Christians wouldn't stand up. They knew it. Because we gave them decades of being passive. Now it's going to cost us dearly, Jim, to stand up. It's going to cost us now. Somebody's going to jail. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to suffer. And I'm not advocating, I'm not advocating violence, but I'm saying,
no violence.
I mean, look at Kim Davis in Kentucky. They put her in. What are the two things that the ruling elite of this country, there are two things that they will crush. They'll crush anybody who tries to stop abortion and anybody who speaks against homosexuality. Those are the two things they'll crush.
It's probably true. It is true that gay people might die at the hands of homophobic gay bashers who will be angry about the decision made over the summer by the Supreme Court stating that states cannot pass bans on same-sex marriage. We have a mass shooting every day this year in this country, and people are going to die due to gay marriage, says Rick Wiles. I don't think he's wrong, but it's going to be at the hands of violent homophobes, if anything. The idea that Christians in an epic final act of martyrdom are going to end up being killed fighting against gay marriage is laughably insane. But if we talk about death and gay marriage, the way I see it going together is gay bashers going after members of the LGBT community. You should, if you want to get some context for this program and the type of conversations they have here, look at the products they advertise on this show. During this particular clip at the beginning, and I don't know if we may not have had this part on screen, they were advertising a fuelless generator that you can call up and buy. Of course, it's prepper stuff for doomsday scenarios that they're constantly scaring you about on this program. Last time we talked about this show, the clip we played at the bottom of the screen, they were advertising a cornmeal bulk bucket that makes nearly 400 servings of cornmeal. They were advertising a bulk rolled oats bucket that will get you 216 servings of rolled oats, and a potato shreds bulk bucket that makes 146 servings of potato. It sounds really like they're advertising a horse feed rather than animal food, but no, this is the prepper fear-mongering. And I often wonder, I know this is my cynical side, it's almost like they've created the entire prepper subject matter of the show merely to be able to sell products off of which they make commissions. That's I know it sounds crazy, but I think we should be open to that possibility. So a shred, just the slightest shred of insight on the Jim Bakker show. Yeah, gay people might die as a result of gay bashing. That's the only thing I'm worried about. There is going to be no killing of Christians who are fighting for bigotry, except maybe in self-defense if the Christians go out gay bashing, as we've seen happen time and again in history. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi, and we're all on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Hatriot Mail is next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, all of the shopping you do can support the David Pakman Show. It's super easy. All you have to do is type into your web browser, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Whenever you shop, you can also bookmark that link. Anything you buy, we get a little kickback. No forms to fill out. It won't look any different, but we will get a little kickback, about 7 or 8% of your purchase. You can also become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Not only will you get commercial-free audio and video feeds of our program as a member, you will get access to the audio and video versions of the world-famous bonus show hosted by producer Lewis Motamedi. I am the sidekick on the bonus show. Today's new member of the day, Kiet Lam. Kiet Lam, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Kiet at davidpakman.com/membership. Let's get into Hatriot Mail for the week.
Because the government that is supposedly totally inept is the same government that can pull off a conspiracy that'll blow your mind. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, so this week's Hatriot Mail is special because it incorporates the completely lunatic, homophobic ad hominems of your traditional Hatriot Mail, but it combines just the tiniest silver lining of bringing up a reasonable question, a reasonable political question relating to foreign policy. Completely insane patriotism on one side, plus a pretty respectable reference to a real political issue. Let's take a listen to that.
David Pakman is a government and a church butt boy. Flaming faggot. If citizens can't have guns, then the f***ing military government couldn't have guns. If Iraq or Iran can't have nukes, then no other f***ing military government body should have nukes.
Okay, so first of all, me being a government and church butt boy, no idea what that even means. Then there's this, we need guns to defend ourselves from the oppressive, tyrannical government idea of, if citizens can't have a certain gun, then the military shouldn't have that type of gun. If citizens can't have any guns, then the military shouldn't have any guns. Ridiculous idea, right? I mean, only in a sort of unrealistic, utopian, which actually wouldn't be, more dystopian libertarian paradise would you have such an argument. But then the Hatriot actually brings up something interesting, which is if Iran and Iraq can't have nukes, why should any government be allowed to have nukes? And that is interesting in the sense that what is the barometer for who gets to have nuclear weapons? Do the countries that already have them get to decide who else has them? Should every country have a right to vote as to who gets to have nuclear weapons? Should there be a mutually agreed upon decommissioning of nuclear weapons? And the question anytime I think about nuclear weapons, I go to the question of, if you have 10 or 12 of these things, you can probably destroy the overwhelming portion of the world population. Why would anybody need 50, 100, or several hundred of these as the United States has? I can't think of any scenario where you would have a need for over 100 nuclear weapons. So patriotism at its very best, at the same time, bringing up a pretty interesting question about nuclear proliferation. Not often that happens. All right, yesterday I talked with Philippe Assouline about sometimes this sort of reflexive criticism of Israel that is not always based in fact. And I received a few emails, which were quite cordial, I must admit, saying, David, can you give an example of what you're talking about, a really specific example of the double standard that exists with regard to Israel? And I have a perfect one. It's not from yesterday, but it's from the last couple of weeks. And what it's about is the double standard with regard to Israeli security policy in the context of what other countries do. So here's the background. I've talked to you many times about the fact that Israel and Egypt share the same concerns, very similar concerns about Gaza and Hamas. And they often employ similar tactics, but the so-called left, the concerning elements of the left that we spoke about on Monday, as described by Richard Dawkins, they really expose their hypocrisy by only criticizing Israel for the same actions that Egypt takes. And this is giving some charity to those people, since they very often don't even know nor care what it is that Egypt is doing, because for them it's just about criticizing Israel. Let's look at one specific element of criticism. A regular talking point in critique of Israel is that they're destroying the Gaza tunnels, which are necessary for Gaza to bring in food. Israel argues that the tunnels are being used to bring in weapons and materials to make weapons, and that's true. The tunnels may also be used to bring in food, but it is absolutely true that the tunnels are being used to bring in weapons and weapons materials. Critics of Israel say that Israel is just imposing the harsh blockade on Gaza for the sake of doing it, and then it has to stop, that the tunnel blocking has to stop, and that all the supplies need to be let in. And critics of Israel will also say that in the process of destroying the tunnels, people's homes are sometimes destroyed, and the Israel haters will say those homes are not destroyed out of necessity. They're destroyed out of a sort of capricious nature to just screw people over for the hell of it. The Egyptian military has been flooding Gaza tunnels used by Palestinian militants and smugglers under the border with Gaza, the Egyptian border with Gaza. It's the latest move by Egypt to do the exact same thing that Israel has been doing. Egypt has also, in the course of flooding and destroying these tunnels, destroyed thousands of homes, evicted families from the border, and this is all sort of to create a new buffer zone. In addition to all of this, Egypt has also instituted checkpoints, the exact same kinds of checkpoints that Israel is routinely lambasted for, the same checkpoints that are an admittedly tragic reality because of the security situation. In fact, since the beginning of this year, the Rafah, Egypt crossing has been closed 251 of the 270 or so days we've had so far of the year. Gazans have been deprived of the ability to travel abroad. You probably haven't heard that, and progressives are mostly silent about it because for them, for some, and I want to be very clear, I'm speaking only of the far left progressives that are hell-bent merely on critiquing Israel, not in really having a conversation, as I am determined to do. They don't really care about what Egypt is doing, even though Egypt has been doing the exact same thing as Israel with regard to the tunnels and with regard to the checkpoints, for the same stated reasons that Israel gives. If indeed the concern is not to slam Israel, but to advocate for what one believes is, advocate against what one believes is unfair treatment of Palestinians, we should be advocating for all of the same types of actions to take place in Egypt as in Israel, and you won't see it on any of the typical websites. The regressive left will not. The actual progressive left understands this and absolutely will. Very quickly, want to touch on workers removing the Ten Commandments monument on state property in Oklahoma. There's a granite monument there of the Ten Commandments, which has sparked controversy since it was installed on Capitol grounds, and it was being removed as of earlier this week. It's going to be moved to listen to this, a private conservative think tank for storage. A contractor that the state hired started removing the monument. This happened after the Supreme Court decided that you can't have that display because it violates state constitutional prohibition on the use of public property to support, quote, any sect, church, denomination, or system of religion. This should be so uncontroversial. If you're the state, you can't elevate one religion over another. You can't elevate religion over non-religion. And saying we are going to take a monument relating to one religion and put it right here on state grounds is obviously establishing that one religion above all others. You might remember that the Church of Satan started lobbying to have a monument put on state capitol grounds, and that was sort of part of the entire blow-up around this. Ultimately, this is exactly the right decision. The state is sending a message about one religion only instead of others. If they leave this monument, the right-wingers are going nuts. Reasonable conservatives, reasonable moderate conservatives actually understand separation of church and state, and they realize this is the right decision, but the religious right is up in arms. The monument is going. That is the right decision, and we'll let you know what kind of protests or craziness come as a result of it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Tyson Slocum, who's Director of Public Citizens Energy Program. Tyson, you know, when we hear about fracking, we often hear about, and correctly so, effect on the environment, the impact on groundwater, earthquakes, etc. But we don't hear nearly as much about the risks facing fracking workers, which are quite significant, aren't they?
They are, and in fact, there's just been some research published that documents a number of health problems and safety issues associated with oil and gas workers, but with workers involved in fracking specifically. That's where most of the growth in oil and gas employment has been, because of the explosive growth of fracking for natural gas and oil in the United States. And so, in addition to injuries that occur from any sort of heavy industrial work like oil and gas work, the thing that's unique about fracking is central to the process of fracturing up these hard rock formations to get at the oil and natural gas that's trapped below is injecting at very high pressure chemically laced compounds that include a number of serious health risk and cancer causing agents. And it's worker exposure to the fracking fluids, both when the fracking fluid is being injected deep down into the well, but then very importantly, you've got flowback, where about 20 to 15% of the volume of water that's injected into these fracking formations flows back up to the surface, often in very unexpected ways, and sometimes with an enormous amount of force that can expose workers to the harmful chemicals. And so the oil and gas sector is one of the most hazardous in terms of exposing workers to safety and health risks.
And the flowbacks, as an example, we often hear when there's an individual instance of something going wrong at a fracking site that, oh, that's not sort of the status quo of how this is done. That's an outlier because A, B, or C specifically was done incorrectly there. Is the flowback something that's a matter of course for fracking, or are those errors that are made?
No, the flowback is supposed to exit the well. What is important is how that flowback is contained and managed, and there are and that depends upon the training of the workers involved. It depends upon the equipment. It depends upon whether or not the well has been properly done. So you want to be able to have a very containable flowback, but of course, we've seen a number of instances where that flowback water has been uncontrolled, and that's where exposure to very harmful chemicals occurs.
Who is in charge of policing fracking work sites?
Well, the Occupational and Safety Health Administration is the lead for onshore worker safety, but OSHA, as it's known, has a very spotty record of doing, and the oil, you see logging sector, the downstream, but in upstream, it is largely not union. And as a result, you don't have a number of health and safety emphasis in a non-union operation that you would in a union shop. And so as a result, it's really up to the industry. The thing that is very important to note is that oil prices have dropped significantly. So when oil prices are high, everybody's making a huge profit. When prices go down, the profit margins become much tighter, and the likelihood that companies will try to cut costs is going to increase. And when you cut costs, some companies will cut corners. And one of the first things to cut is worker safety initiatives. And so what we're seeing right now in a lot of these oil fields is companies pushing equipment workers to the limit to try and maximize production level because of the low prices, or you're seeing them sacrifice alarming statistics on to cut corners.
The saddest part about all of this is that we're at a place right now where if societally we decided, hey, you know what, we actually have the technology to not even need fracking, and we can subsidize energy in a different way than that which we're doing now, and subsidize alternative renewable energy, we wouldn't even really need this. In other words, this is not, according to the economists I've spoken to, a necessary energy source if we start planning properly now for the next 20 years. But sadly, that seems to not even be a factor.
Yeah, and in fact, fracking of natural gas has pushed the market price of natural gas to the point where it is competing with renewables. Renewables are coming in at very low price points, but when you've got natural gas, it's actually pushing renewables out, and that's a big problem.
As you can probably tell, our connection to Tyson is not good, and it's only getting worse, so we will leave it there. A very important topic, the hazardous working conditions for fracking workers. Tyson Slocum, thanks so much for being with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, this is the part of the program where we talk about sacrificing animals and drinking their blood. U.S. Senate candidate Augustus Sol Invictus walked from Central Florida to the Mojave Desert 2 years ago, and he spent a whole week fasting and praying. And this was all part of a pagan ritual to give thanks. And when he returned home, he, as part of that ritual, killed a goat and drank its blood. The chairman of the Libertarian Party of Florida has resigned to call attention to Invictus's candidacy in the hopes that other Libertarian Party leaders in Florida will denounce him. Adrian Willey, who was the Libertarian candidate for governor last year, says Invictus wants to lead a civil war, is trying to recruit neo-Nazis to the Libertarian Party, and brutally and sadistically dismembered a goat. He said, quote, he is the exact opposite of a libertarian. He's a self-proclaimed fascist. He's promoting a second civil war. It's absolute insanity. We must explain to people this is the opposite of libertarians. This guy has no place in the Libertarian Party. Augustus Sol Invictus is a 32-year-old lawyer who changed his name from his given name to that. He declines to reveal his actual given name. It's a Latin phrase that means majestic, unconquered son. He says the criticisms of him for dismembering a goat and drinking its blood are all part of a smear campaign. He says he's not a white supremacist. He says 4 children of his, that his 4 children are Hispanic. And he does acknowledge, though, that there are white supremacists that support his campaign. I love that. It's like the Donald Trump campaign. Not racist, but very popular with racists. Now, what about the goat sacrifice? Because that is an issue of paramount importance. He said, quote, I did sacrifice a goat. I know that's probably a quibble in the mind of most Americans. I sacrificed an animal to the god of the wilderness. Yes, I drank the goat's blood. Okay, so this is crazy, right? It's obviously crazy. But I started thinking about this. What's worse, sacrificing a goat or sacrificing the poor by not giving them even basic healthcare coverage via the Medicaid expansion, which has been going on in Florida, and which Augustus Sol Invictus would also have gone along with? And I also received another email about this story, which made a pretty good point. Why is it crazy to vote for someone who sacrificed a goat to the wilderness god, but it's not crazy to vote for someone who thinks God sent his son to earth to be born to a virgin woman, eventually to die on a cross and be resurrected on Easter? One is certainly more commonly accepted in society, but are they actually different? And to be honest, if I separate myself from the fact that Christianity is far more common than sacrificing goats and drinking their blood to the wilderness god, what is the actual difference between the two? I don't know. Send me your thoughts on that. Scientists have identified a specific potential male birth control pill. Back in June, I told you that there were a number of male birth control options in development. There were injections and there were pills. And overwhelmingly, the response from our audience was very, very positive, sort of conceptually. But I did get emails from men saying, I'm concerned about the side effects. I'm concerned about the potential health damage. We now have news about 2 specific developments with regard to male birth control. Both are pill form, and both are currently given to organ transplant recipients to suppress their immune systems. The 2 drugs are cyclosporin A, that's also known as CSA, and FK506. And when people get organ transplants, they are given these drugs to reduce the chance that their bodies will reject the new organs. And the way they work is they prevent the immune system from making a particular protein, which normally mobilizes T cells to attack. And they do this by inhibiting a particular enzyme called calcineurin. And by studying mice, researchers in Japan figured out that a version of calcineurin is found only in sperm. It contains 2 particular types of protein. One is called triple P3CC. The other is called triple P3R2. They figured out what these proteins do. They created male mice that were unable to make those proteins, and they were not able to impregnate female mice. So the idea is these mice, without the protein, have sex with the female mice. The female mice don't become pregnant. The absence of that protein, they believe, is making the males infertile. As soon as they stopped taking the drugs preventing that enzyme, the fertility came back within 1 week. There is not yet clarity about whether the immune system would be impacted by this. As I mentioned, normally these drugs are given to suppress the immune system in organ transplant recipients. So there are real questions about whether there is a certain dosage that would prevent men from getting women pregnant while at the same time not impact the immune system in a negative way. There are people who emailed me after seeing this and they said, David, I would not go anywhere near this. I think that the vasal gel is the better option. That's the one I told you about that's injected into the vas deferens. It's a polymer. It can be reversed. Pills are way more lucrative, though. If you have to take a pill every month or every week to as a form of male birth control, that is going to make pharmaceutical companies way more money than getting an injection that lasts potentially years until you want to have it reversed. Generally, conceptually, huge support among men for male birth control. We will keep an eye on it. Some medical journals saying that realistically, broad availability of male birth control is still many years away. Others saying we could be looking at 2 to 3 years before pretty advanced clinical trials begin. Send me your thoughts on this. 219-2DavidP is our voicemail number. I have a voicemail here that is looking at the Kim Davis situation from a different perspective. This is not a perspective I thought about. Let's take a listen.
Hi there. I'd like to comment on Kim Davis and a lot of these evangelicals. First of all, I empathize with people that are overweight, even grossly overweight. I fight my weight too. But why is it that so many of these evangelicals, like Kim Davis, are grossly overweight, in her case, frankly, morbidly obese, and one of the 7 deadly sins, repeat, deadly sins of the evangelicals is the sin of gluttony. So how can those people possibly believe that if they were to fall over dead right now, that they would not go straight to hell?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you're looking for ways in which Kim Davis is going against the religious teachings, which she cites as the explanation for her bigoted homophobia that led to her breaking the law as Kentucky County Clerk, there's no shortage of them, right? Her multiple marriages, she's doing all sorts of stuff. I didn't notice that Kim Davis was morbidly obese. I mean, I think every time I've seen her, she's sort of obscured by either the desk at the county clerk's office or by Mike Huckabee on a stage or a podium somewhere. I don't know. Interesting perspective. Interested to hear what the audience thinks about that. Send us your thoughts about it. You can call anytime, 219-2DavidP. And of course, the show doesn't have to end now. There's this entire other show called The Bonus Show. It's for our supporters at davidpakman.com/membership. If you like our show and you've been listening for free or watching for free for many years, that's fantastic. If you have the financial means, we're talking about 16 cents a day, consider grabbing a membership at davidpakman.com/membership and contributing, supporting the work that we do. And then the show wouldn't be over now. You would have an entire bonus show to watch or listen to.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.